Hello.
And welcome to Larry's Library.
Hello, welcome to Larry's Library. We're continuing with Swiss Family Robinson. They're surviving well on their island. Chapter 45, Bears, Narrow Escape, the Combat, Discovery of Porcelain Earth. We quitted the borders of the swamp, but instead of directing our steps through the desert, we followed a little stream of water that led us to the rock where we had reposed on our first excursion into the savannah. It was a delicious route in comparison with our painful journey of the morning. We found trees, grass, in short, it was a little oasis in the desert, and we named it Green Valley. We were yet distant about half an hour's journey from the Jackal's Grotto. Jack and Fritz had stopped a moment to adjust their burdens, and I also stopped with them, while Ernest marched forward, followed by Fulb.
Fulb?
It's one of the dogs. The philosopher is in a hurry to get home, said Jack, laughing. He runs that he may be rested first. But scarcely had the fellow finished his sentence when we heard a cry of distress. It was the voice of Ernest, followed by two terrible howls mingled with the barking of the dog. A moment after, Ernest reappeared. He was running at full speed, his face deadly pale, and he cried out in a voice stifled with fear, "Bears! Bears! They are following me!" And the poor boy fell into my arms more dead than alive. I had not time to reassure him, and I felt myself seized with a sudden shiver as an enormous bear appeared, immediately followed by a second. "Courage, children," was all I could say. I seized my gun and prepared to receive the enemy. Fritz did the same, and with a courage and coolness far above his years, he took his place by my side. Jack also took his gun, but remained in the rear, while Ernest, who had no arms, for in his fright he had let his gun fall, took to his heels and ran away. But our dogs were already at the attack, and they had commenced to measure themselves with their terrible adversaries. We fired together, and although our shots did not bring down the enemy, they nevertheless told well. One of the bears had a jaw broken, the other a shoulder fractured. But the combat was not yet finished. They were only partially disabled. Our faithful servants did prodigies of valor. They fought most desperately, rolling in the dust with their enemies, while their blood poured in streams on the sand. We would have fired again, but we were afraid that we should kill the dogs, it being impossible during the changing contest to take any aim. We resolved to advance nearer, and at about 4 paces from the bears we discharged our pistols direct at their heads. The huge animals gave a groan that caused us to shudder, and then fell back motionless in the sand. It was too late to meddle with the animals, and we took the precaution before leaving to draw the 2 carcasses into the jackal's cave and cover them with thorn bushes to keep off all carnivorous beasts and birds of prey. We also buried our ostrich eggs in the sand, as their weight retarded our march greatly, and we could leave them here until the morrow. The sun was set when we rejoined my dear companion and our little Francis. A good fire and a well-cooked supper refreshed our weary bodies, and my little heroes commenced a long narration of the exploits of the day. Master Jack making up for the small share he had had in our victory by boasting and swaggering enough for all. My wife and Francis had not been idle during our absence. They had discovered on the banks of a stream a sort of greasy white earth which appeared to me to be fine pipe clay. They had also collected water enough for the use of our domestic animals, and, by the force of industry and perseverance, had amassed at the entrance of the defile a quantity of materials necessary for my projected fortification. I thanked my good wife for the pains she had taken. We then lighted a large fire to guard us through the night, and our dogs, whose wounds my wife had washed and dressed with fresh butter, lay down beside it. I wished, before retiring for the night, to make a trial of the earth my wife had found, for I suspected that it was porcelain. I made 2 roughly shaped bowls from it and threw them into a furnace of hot cinders, and we then all retired to the tent, where sweet sleep soon sealed our eyelids. The next morning it required a strong effort to tear us from our beds, so wearied out had we been the preceding day. I found my 2 bowls hardened by the heat. They were, as I supposed, porcelain, rather coarse-grained, but well enough for our purposes. We breakfasted in haste, the beasts were harnessed to the cart, and after a pleasant little ride, we arrived safe and sound at the Cavern of the Bears. Chapter 46. Preparation of the bear's flesh, cups out of ostrich eggs, Angora rabbits, and antelopes. We devoted a whole day to the preparation of the bear's flesh. After having skinned them with the utmost care and precaution, I cut off the hams and then divided the rest of the meat into long strips about an inch in thickness, and we exposed the whole to a good current of smoke, as the ancient buccaneers used to do. The grease was collected in bamboo canes and carefully preserved, for besides its use in the kitchen, my wife said it was excellent on bread in lieu of butter. We had about 100 pounds of fat, together with that which the peccaries had afforded us a few days before. We abandoned the carcasses to our dogs, and they, aided by the birds of prey, soon picked the bones so clean that there remained nothing but two perfectly white, dry skeletons, which we carried home with us for our museum. As for the skins, they were carefully washed with salt water and rubbed with sand and ashes, and although our talents in the art of currying were poor enough, we rendered the skins sufficiently soft for all purposes. Our labors had been too peaceful for the restless, turbulent character of my boys. I could see that they were tired and fretful, and I thought that the best plan would be to diversify our work with some amusement. I proposed to them to make an excursion alone in the desert. My proposition, as one may suppose, was joyfully received, and the perspective of an unchecked course rallied the flagging spirits of my little companions. Ernest refused to accompany them, preferring to remain at home with us. On the other hand, Francis was so eager to accompany his brothers that I at last permitted him to go. My wife and I resumed our domestic labors, and Ernest, tranquilly seated on the sand, occupied himself in making cups from ostrich eggs, for we had discovered by putting our eggs into hot water that the principle of life was exhausted. Ernest had read of a plan somewhere to separate the eggs by surrounding them with a string steeped in strong vinegar. The action of the acid on the lime contained in the shell forms a circular line which gradually eats through, but the lining membrane of the egg was so hard that it was necessary to cut it with a knife. It had all the elasticity of parchment. We soon quitted this occupation to undertake another. While examining a small cavern which we had discovered near the tent, I found several minerals, among others a piece of amianth known as being incombustible, and also a superb block of talc as transparent as glass, and which I resolved to fashion into window panes. Ernest aided me as much as he was able, and we soon detached a splendid piece about 2 feet in length and the same in thickness. My wife, who received everything that could recall Europe to her mind with pleasure, was overjoyed at our new discovery, especially when I informed her that this mineral could be divided into leaves no thicker than paper. We had been thus occupied the best part of the day, and as evening approached, we gathered around our hearth where our good housewife was cooking 2 bear's paws which had been well soaked in brine, and the smell of which, as it escaped from the pot, promised us a delicious supper. And we sat down to while away the time in conversation until our huntsmen returned. We did not wait long, for the galloping of their steeds was soon heard, and in another moment they were at our sides. Jack and Francis each carried a little kid on his back with the feet tied together, and the game bag of Fritz appeared to me to be pretty full. "A fine chase, Papa!" cried Jack. "Storm carried me through the desert like a flash of lightning. Fritz has 2 magnificent Angora rabbits in his pouch, and also a complacent cuckoo who led us to one of the finest hives I have ever seen. We shall be able to get plenty of honey." "Jack has not told all," said Fritz. "We have taken a whole troop of antelopes prisoners and have driven them into our domains, where we can hunt them and tame them just when we please." Turning towards Jack, whose face seemed very much swollen, I said, "What is the matter with your cheeks? Have your adventures been dangerous in any way?" Fritz interrupted his answer and began the following narration. "After quitting you, we took the direction of the valley, and finding a narrow place where 2 or 3 trees had fallen down, we took advantage of this natural bridge and crossed to the other side of the river. We rode on some time without perceiving anything, our courses going at full speed, and the sun not being high enough to be unpleasant. At last we discovered in the distance 2 herds of small animals, of what kind we could not distinguish. but I thought they were either antelopes or gazelles. Our first care was to call our dogs together and keep them close by our sides, as we knew the animals were more afraid of them than of us. I then divided my forces. I gave Francis the line of the river as his position. Jack occupied the middle, while I, mounted on the Angora, sustained the right wing and endeavored to drive the animals to the center. We effected this movement, and one of the herds passed the river as quietly as if the act had been voluntary. The other herd did not seem to perceive us until we were close to them, and when suddenly they raised themselves from the grass where they had been lying, and stretching out their long necks and little heads, surmounted by short pointed ears, set off at full speed, and now our chase commenced. We urged our coursers onward, and giving our dogs their liberty, we soon forced the entire troop over the river and drove them into the defile which separated us from the savannah. After we had secured them in our dominions, the next thing was to keep them there. Several plans were proposed, but at last the following was chosen. We stretched a long cord from one side of the defile to the other, and fastened to it every light thing we could find, the continual motion of which frightened the animals away whenever they approached it. The ostrich plumes in our hats, our handkerchiefs, etc., furnished us with materials. "Admirable," said I, as the boy stopped as if to see how his stratagem was received. "Admirable. The only thing is, in the night it cannot be seen, but it truly was a bright thought for such a boy. But about the rabbits," added I, "what do you intend to do with them? If they should happen to get in your mother's vegetable garden, there would not be much of it left." No, but I thought that one of our two islands would make a good home for them. For instance, Shark Island would make a magnificent warren and furnish us with many a good dish and fine furs to make caps out of." "But how did you come to take them alive?" "The honor of the capture is due to my eagle. He pounced down upon a troop of rabbits that were flying before us and carried off two in his talons. I rescued them before he had injured them, and he consoled himself by killing another, which he soon devoured." I could see that Jack was watching every opportunity to put in a word, and I laughingly requested the poor fellow to speak. "In my turn," said he, "in my turn. I galloped on with Francis while Fritz was chasing the rabbits. The dogs followed us, and suddenly we saw them jump forward and run after two little animals about the size of a hare that fled with incredible rapidity. Away we all went, and after a hot chase of a quarter of an hour, we captured the two fugitives. There they are," continued the young narrator, throwing down before us two beautiful little animals. "I think they are young fawns." "Well, whatever they may be," continued Jack. And I think," said I, "that they are antelopes." "Well, whatever they may be," continued Jack, "our dogs behaved admirably, and so I can say did their masters. But that was nothing to what happened afterwards. We had scarcely commenced our progress when a sort of cuckoo began to fly before us, singing away as if to defy us. I had already leveled my gun when Fritz requested me to recollect that it was loaded with ball, and that I should only waste the charge. I accordingly slung my gun on my back, and we rode on, the cuckoo flying on before us, when suddenly he stopped just over a bee's nest artfully concealed in the ground. We now held a council of war about the nest and discussed the plan of attack. Francis begged to be excused, recalling to our memories the former attack at Falcon's Nest. Fritz was willing to do all the advising part, but would rather leave the execution to somebody else, so you see, at last the whole affair devolved upon me. Armed with some sulphur matches that I found in my knapsack, I advanced and tried to suffocate the bees by throwing the lighted matches down the hole, when suddenly a rumbling noise was heard, and in a second a swarm of bees emerged, attacking me on all sides. My hands and face were violently treated, and it was with the greatest difficulty that I mounted my buffalo and rode away, bearing with me the honorable marks of the conflict. I could scarcely believe," said Jack as he finished his recital, "that so small an animal could cause so much pain." I reflected long upon what Jack had told me concerning the strange bird that had shown them the nest of bees. I easily recognized it as being the cuckoo indicator of naturalists. But, thought I, how, if this coast is uninhabited, could the bird have known that human beings liked honey and would be willing to share the discovery with him? Is not such conduct a sign that we are not the first men who have trod this soil? May not the interior of the country be inhabited? These considerations were of the highest importance to us, and I was convinced that it would not be prudent to advance into the interior unless with the greatest caution. I also resolved to build a fortress on one side of the coast, And I chose Shark Island as its situation, as it appeared to me that a strong fortification that would command the coast of Felsenheim and fortified by our 2 cannons would enable us to defend ourselves against all attack from the interior if any ever took place. And that's the end of chapter 46.
It was a honey guide.
Chapter 47, Ostriches again, a hunt and a capture, acquisition of treasure, euphorbia, vanilla.
By the way, that was a honey guide.
That was a honey guide bird?
Yeah, the honey guide bird. They take humans and honey guiders to bees nests, and so then they can break out. So then the thing that they brought can break out some honey and give some to them, and they can. It's actually a symbiotic relationship.
Very nice.
And there were no glitches.
This has been Larry's Library. Bye.